about to hear a revolution in talk radio, Liberty Talk Radio, where the critical thinking will defrag your mind of propaganda-ridden viruses induced by mass media news programming. No BS here, just the facts.
And now we present to you America's quintessential iconoclastic anomaly. Wow. In talk radio, your host, Joe Cristiano.
Welcome, everyone, to Liberty Talk Radio, America's libertarian voice, broadcasting from our studio in Tulsa, Oklahoma, to around the world. I'm your host, Joe Cristiano, and this is your antidote to popular talk radio. Folks, it's time for us to take back control of our government, now before this bureaucratic, oversized, and self-serving federal government starves us of our property, our freedom, our rights, and our liberty. But to do this, we must shed conventional thinking regarding our political structure. We need to be revolutionaries in thought. This is in action. Only after we recognize what our government is doing to our freedom and our Constitution will we start taking it back. And this program is just about that. Well, today I want to talk about a little bit about money. It's a subject that people never want to talk about. It's very unusual. Even people that I know pretty well, I'll ask them I don't ask them how much money's in their bank account, but I'll ask them something about money, related to money, and all of a sudden they get very uptight. They get almost insulted, and they tell me they refuse to discuss it. And I don't understand that. Whenever it comes to money, people become extremely private. And it's not that you ask, well, geez, do you have a savings account? How much is in it? And how much is in your checking account? I don't mean any of that. But anything related to money, people seem to backtrack and refuse to engage in any sort of conversation. I think money is probably the most important item, one single item that we have to discuss today. As a nation and as a world, people must discuss money, because the money as we have known it in the past no longer exists. For example, just the other day, there was a documentary that I watched that in China, and I'm not sure if this is all the way through China or just in certain counties in China, where you don't have any money at all. There is no money. There's no paper money. There's nothing. Everything is placed on your iPhone or your iPad or whatever it is, your electronic device, your phone or whatever. And when you go buy something, you just take your electronic device, your internet device, and there's a barcode on it, and it clicks it, and bingo, it takes money out of your account. Now, you never see your money. It just gets loaded into your account, your electronic account, and then it gets withdrawn from your electronic account. There are no checks, there are no credit cards, there's no money, there's no semblance of money at all. And many people say, isn't that great? You can't lose it. It's always with you. Even if you lose your electronic device, you need a special code to get in, etc. It's very secure. Well, there's a dark side to that. First of all, you know how much money you have, but the only other person that knows how much money you have is the government. In other words, you have no store of value whatsoever. You have electronic digits that are inside of your electronic device. And no one knows how much money you have other than the government. Isn't that brilliant? From a government point of view, it's brilliant. And people are saying, wow, we should adopt that here, because then we wouldn't have credit cards, we wouldn't have this, we wouldn't have that, and we'll know exactly how much money we're spending, and it's just a wonderful system. Well, first of all, we've gotten away from the basics of real money. Let me go back a little bit in American history. Back in the early 1900s, all the way till 1982, the penny was made out of 95% copper. Now, the reason for that was that copper is not as precious metal, but a relatively expensive commercial metal. Copper is used for just about everything from space exploration to, making housing and everything. And so copper had a certain value to it. And so pennies were made out of copper. In fact, I think they were 95% copper and like 5% zinc or something like that. All right. And a penny, in fact, was valued at a penny. In other words, the size of the penny and the weight of the penny was worth about a penny. So you had something of value that was worth at least the amount of money that was in this coin. So, but this you have yourself. The government didn't know how much you had. You could place it, you could hide it, you could invest it, you could do whatever you want to it. But it was your penny. It wasn't a commercial entity on an iPhone or an electronic device. Now, the nickels were made out of 75% copper and 25% nickel. And the amount of nickel and copper in the nickel was worth about 5 cents. And the first nickel was called the, I forgot the name of it. My mind is slipping me. The Shield. It was 1866, came out with the Shield, and it was 75% copper, 25% nickel. Now, what people don't realize that today, although the Shield is no longer on the nickel, it's the Jefferson nickel and whatever we have today, it's still 75% copper and 35% nickel, 25% nickel. In other words, it is the same economic value from 1866. Now, our Congress tried to do away with the nickel because it was too expensive to make. A nickel, in fact, has, today, the price of copper and nickel bounce all over the place, but right now, the nickel is worth somewhere around 85% of a nickel, of 5 cents. Sometimes a few years ago, it was like a few cents above a nickel, right? But basically, a nickel is still worth about a nickel, and it fluctuates. So let's take, for example, if a person had all of their money in nickels. Let's say the guy was a millionaire, and he decided to buy 1 million nickels, and he put it in storage. First of all, no one's going to steal it because they get a hernia carrying all the nickels around. And there was an economic crash. I mean, everything went bust. A total depression, right? What would happen to the paper dollar? Well, the government would print paper dollars up to start the economy back up again, right? So everyone would have money. And then what would happen to the money? Well, every time you print extra money, you reduce the value of the bill that you printed before it. Now, we haven't seen this inflation, but we've seen this inflation, or we're seeing this inflation right now in places in South America, where all of a sudden a $1 billion bill or $1 million bill won't buy you a loaf of bread. But instead of having the paper currency, if you had it in nickels itself, the price of the nickel would go up as the value of the dollar would go down. So what better way to secure your financial future than to buy nickels? Now, as far as pennies are concerned, although pennies were made out of 95% copper, now they're 97.5% made of zinc. And zinc is worth about 2/3 of a penny, because zinc is a very inexpensive metal. But even in the event of a financial collapse, if you have pennies, you have zinc, and zinc will be worth even more money. So as the price of money inflates, the price of the nickel and the penny go up. In other words, you'll actually make money holding pennies and nickels. Now, I only bring that up because at one time we had all our currency was the same way. When you had a dollar, that dollar was backed by gold, right? It was backed by gold. Now, you didn't get a pound of gold. You got the equivalent of $1 worth of gold if you went to the bank to cash it in. And then gold was just an easy way to carry it around rather than carrying around bulky gold. So if you had a $10 bill, you got $10 worth of gold, whatever the price was. At that time, it was $35 an ounce. So you always had secure money. In fact, we had the very best economy under that scenario because it kept a check on government spending, because the government could only spend as much money as it had. Well, all that is gone. We're no longer under the gold standard. Remember, President Nixon told us that they're going to temporarily, remove the dollar from the gold standard. Right? Temporarily. Well, that was 50 years ago, and it's still temporary, In other words, we started printing money that we could not back by gold because we didn't have that much. And then we came into inflation and depression and recessions and whatever. And we're having this bouncing ball recessionary periods as we go along. People don't have money today. Now, there are two coins that still have some intrinsic value, as they call it. And that would be the nickel and the penny. And they are still in circulation. The nickel is still 75% copper and 25% nickel. And it's worth almost a nickel. I mean, if you melted it down and you wanted to sell it, but if you include manufacturing costs on a whole bit, it's probably worth more than a nickel. But it's still worth a nickel. In the event of hyperinflation, right, the nickel will be worth more. In other words, if you went to Venezuela today and you had nothing but American nickels, you can buy anything you wanted. I mean, you can get a whole meal for a nickel, right? Because it has some intrinsic value. And it seems that the whole world is getting not only away from intrinsic value, it's getting away even from the paper dollar, something of physical manifestation that says, hey, this is a dollar printed by the government and is guaranteed by the government. Now we're going to digitize money, which I think is a big mistake. Now, if people want to do that, that's fine. But we do have value in our currency. Now, the penny, which was 95% copper, back in 1982, the latter part of 82, they stopped making it out of copper and started making it out of zinc, which is about 95.5% zinc. They, in fact, devalued the dollar back in 1982. But even devalued, it's worth about 3/4 cent, or 2/3 cent rather. Right? And depending on the price of nickels, the price of the metal, it may go above that, it may go slightly below that, but it's probably at a low point now, and it'll probably be worth more than that. But the problem with all of this is that no one really understands money. Banking system back in the old days, the old West, when you went to a bank, that bank had to have a reserve of gold. When it issued, even if it was a local currency, it had to be backed by gold. If they gave you $1, they had to have a dollar's worth of gold in the bank, and that dollar wasn't money, it was a receipt for the gold in the bank. So everything was based on something of value. Quite frankly, right now, our currency and currencies all over the world, including the euro, the British pound, the Chinese yuan, all of it is based on nothing but faith. Faith in the fact that the government will ensure that people will accept it. But you cannot escape inflation. Inflation is something that governments, even the biggest, most powerful government in the world, cannot control. Once inflation starts, it's over. I've tried to study the Federal Reserve, and try to understand what money means today, how it's made, how it's printed, who prints it, where the money comes from, what it's backed by. And I've spent hours, and I follow it when I'm reading it, but as soon as I get away from it, it escapes me, like, can't remember a thing. It's so convoluted, it is so complicated, and of course we have a Federal Reserve, which is not a U.S. agency, it's independent of the United States, and they're the ones that control our currency. Well, to me, this has gone well beyond what was the forefathers had envisioned our country to be. Right? Now, I just wish if we can get back to a currency that was real, that has intrinsic value, and when you do that, and you have to stick with the amount of money that's available based on the amount of backing that's available for it, whether it be silver or gold or whatever, right? Then you control your budget, because you cannot spend, you should not be able to spend any more than you can backed by gold or silver, or maybe even copper and platinum or whatever, you know. And there were platinum coins. There also are platinum coins that you can actually buy. Platinum is a very expensive metal. And just for information, right now platinum is going for less than gold, which was, I think, the second time in history that this happened. But platinum is usually a lot more expensive than gold. And right now it's going at a discount to gold, which I really don't understand. But it's a great investment opportunity, I'm sure. But understand that today, with all this hype about obtaining Bitcoin, for example, that's another one of my favorites, Bitcoin. People say, well, that's tomorrow's currencies. You know, I'm way behind. You know, I'm just too old to understand. I don't understand Bitcoin. I wish I understood Bitcoin. I mean, I studied it, but every time I do, I come out with the same answer. I don't understand it. The one question that's never asked about Bitcoin when people debate it, you know, there's plenty of debates on TV you can watch regarding Bitcoin, and they all drive me nuts. But the person, they would argue back and forth whether Bitcoin is, you know, worth more than, or the Bitcoin premise is worth more than gold. But they never asked the question, what happens if the dollar gets depreciated by 50%? And the prices of everything go up 100%, and the dollar gets devalued by 50%. Well, people will say, well, Bitcoin would worth, instead of what, 7,000 to 8,000 today, it'd be worth 14,000, 15,000. I said, okay. Well, what if it gets devalued from 100 points of 100, let's say, that's a point in time, to zero? Now the dollar's worth zero. How much is a Bitcoin worth? No one answers the question. If the dollar goes to zero, is the Bitcoin then worth $1 million? Well, if the dollar is zero, 1 million times zero is, come on, folks, you know the answer, zero. But no one asks that question. That's the only question I want to know. How much is it worth? And no one could tell me. So it seems that we are headed either for the same way China is going, where we have electronic currency, which would be the worst thing, because all of our freedom and all of our privacy is gone. That means the government can tell everything you buy, when you bought it, and how much you paid. And that's not the intent of the government. The government is to protect our freedom and our rights. Our government is to preserve the Constitution. And everything that the government does today violates the Constitution and the very premise from which it was written. And I don't know how we're going to get out of that. I don't know what the resolution is. But it just seems that the days ahead are going to be very dark. If, in fact, our dollar goes into hyperinflation, I don't know what will happen to the United States. In other words, will the government just start printing money and then we become Venezuela? If you speak to people about money, they won't talk about it. I want to talk about money. I meet people and I just ask them questions about money, not how much money they had in the bank, but ask them about money, about international affairs. And I get answers like, well, I'm not worried about it. Trump is going to make America great again, And I go, I'm so frustrated I can't get anyone to converse on it. Or what happens is that people get, well, I'm sorry, that's one subject that I don't talk about with other people. That's a private thing. I don't want to know how much money you have in the bank, if you have any money in the bank at all. If you're bankrupt, I don't give a damn. I'm talking about the principles of money, of where we should be going, how we should all benefit by this rather than going down the path we're going. And Americans can't seem to do that. Now, who do I blame for that? Well, I blame the government, because the governments control the school systems, and the school systems control our students, and our students learn absolutely nothing. So it seems that we are in, not a catch-22, we're in a losing situation. We're in a situation where our money is being debased, inflation is being hidden, our currency is really valueless, our debt right now is astronomical. Just the debt on what the government allocates every year, the budget, how much we budget every year and how much we're behind on that, is very quickly approaching $23 trillion. That's just the budgeted items. If you take the entire debt, everything, the debt of the entire nation, we're talking about $1 quadrillion. Well, no wonder we don't have money backed by gold or silver or platinum or copper or whatever, because there isn't enough of that to go around. There's not enough to cover it. And the only reason why we got out of the gold standard was not, as Nixon said, to protect the dollar from the speculators. It had nothing to do with speculators. Speculators want to make money. They want solid money. It was because the government knew that it was in such debt back 50 years ago that it couldn't didn't have enough gold to support the currency that was being printed. And those were the good old days. Today, it's exponentially higher. The amount of money that has been printed, our debt to everyone. In fact, there's the 5 most indebted nations in the world. First is Cyprus, total basket case, totally bankrupt, small country. The second one is Greece, totally bankrupt, small country. Italy, where my parents come from, Italy, as you know, we all hear on TV that they may break from the euro because the European Union will not supply them with any more funds because they can't pay back what they owe now, right? Then we have Japan, and Japan is an anomaly because most of the money that is indebted is was borrowed from the citizens. So it's like a family thing, like it's, you're lending money to your daughter or your father or something like that. It's within the family. It's not external. So I'd like to take Japan out of it. If we took Japan out of it, the United States would be number 4. If you include Japan, the United States would be 5. And we have the most debt in the world right now in dollars. I mean, no one comes even close to us in dollars. So we are, in fact, a bankrupt nation. We have a trade imbalance where we always owe money. We print money out of thin air. Most of the money we print is not even printed anymore. It's just there digitally, right? And there is no way we could ever pay it back. Now, I have no idea what's going to happen, but all I can suggest to everyone is save your penny and save your nickels it may be the only thing you have left. Okay? With that, I'd like to thank you very much for listening in. We appreciate that you guys listening in, and let us hear from you. Our email address is comments@libertytalkradio.com. Please tell your friends about this program if you enjoy it. And let me hear from you. And if you have any suggestions on what you'd like me to talk about, I'd be more than happy to accommodate. Okay? With that, stay well. Stay tuned.